All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Left Bank Books Presents award-winning author Sam J. Miller, who will discuss his new novel, The Blade Between, with me, Shane Mullen. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Sam and HarperCollins, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation and are bringing you the things you love the most about Left Bank Books, with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. I believe this is our 100th virtual event. I need to double check on the count on that, but it's getting really close if it's not 100 exactly. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends. The holidays are fast upon us. This is a great gift for anyone on your list, especially the horror occult fans on your list. And you can do that at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff here through the most unusual of times. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, but you can type them at any point in time because I might just work them into the conversation. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. About tonight's book, The Blade Between. Oh, ta-da. This is a recommended book from Crime Reads. From Nebula Award winner Sam J. Miller comes a frightening and uncanny ghost story about a rapidly changing city in upstate New York and the mysterious forces that threaten it. Ronan Suspezi promised himself he'd never return to Hudson. The sleepy upstate town was no place for a restless gay photographer, but his father is ill and New York City's distractions have become too much for him. He hopes that a quick visit will help him recharge. Ronan reconnects with his two friends from high school, Dom, his first love, and Dom's wife, Atala. The three former misfits mourn what their town has become, overrun by gentrifiers and corporate interests, with friends and neighbors getting evicted en masse and a mayoral election coming up. Ronan and Atala craft a plan to rattle the newcomers and expose their true motives, but in doing so, they unleash something far more mysterious and uncontainable. Hudson has a rich, proud history, and it turns out the real estate developers aren't the only forces threatening its well-being. The spirits undergirding this once thriving industrial town are enraged. Ronan's hijinks have overlapped with a bubbling up of hate and violence among friends and neighbors, and everything is spiraling out of control. Ronan must summon the very best of himself to shed his own demons and save the city he once loathed. Paul Tremblay, the author of The Cabin at the End of the World and Survivor Song, says, a successful influencer photographer returns to the gentrifying hometown that nearly broke him, and all hell breaks loose. The Blade Between is as addictive and brutal as it is smart and challenging. Miller unflinchingly confronts the sins of our past and present. The horrors here are rooted in there being no easy answers, despite our individual and collective souls being ultimately at stake. Plus whales. I just love that. And the Nightmare magazine says, the book is full of moments of slowly rising dread that end in shocking revelations, all of them building to a nightmarish town festival where the growing horror finally reveals its true face and intent. Sam J. Miller is the Nebula Award-winning author of The Art of Starving, an NPR Best of the Year book, and Blackfish City, Nebula finalist John J. Campbell Award winner. A recipient of the Shirley Jackson Award and a graduate of the Clarion Writers Workshop, Sam's short stories have been nominated for the World Fantasy, Theodore Sturgeon, and Locus Awards, and represented in dozens of anthologies. He lives in New York City. And now, without further ado, I am very happy and proud to be able to welcome Sam J. Miller for Left Bank Books. Here we are. If you could all give a hearty round of applause. Hello, Sam.
Hello. How's it going?
I'm doing really well.
Thank you for having me and reading all those nice things about me.
Yeah, I love that quote. And whales.
Yeah.
It's just one of the best blurbs I think I've ever read.
Paul Tremblay is as good at writing blurbs as he is at writing horror novels that fuck me up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to start first with genre. So before we really get into, we're going to do a little reading, but this book is categorized as horror, but I scare so easily. And thankfully, I think it plays out a little bit different in books for me than in movies. I could not probably watch this if it were a movie, but I love it as a book. But there are so many elements of other genres in here. There's a lot of queer, even almost queer romance going on. There's mystery, there's the occult, there's elements of fantasy, there's dreamscape. So there's so many things going on and so many different genres to really place this in. So I want to know, when you were writing it, what did you set out to write, and where do you think that this book should be at in a bookstore?
Well, I'll preface that by saying I'm really bad at genre, and I tend to write something and think it is a genre, and then everyone disagrees with me, including editors. I definitely set out to write the kind of like Stephen King horror novel that I was obsessed with when I was younger, and still am, to be honest. I had this. I wrote my second novel, Blackfish City, did pretty well, and it was a science fiction novel. And as a science fiction writer and reader, that's the audience that I sort of naturally gravitate towards. And there's definitely something to be said for finding a space, like a genre space, and staying there. But the book that my brain really wanted me to write, that my heart really wanted me to write after that, was not science fiction. It was a total new direction. And it turned out to be this weird gentrification ghost story. So I wrote it, I think, as a ghost story, as a horror story, but I edited it as a thriller. My editor at Echo Press, Zach Wagman, is an amazing editor and has worked on a ton of amazing thrillers, including Dennis Lehane's books. So really helped me sort of like hone the mystery beats and the thriller beats. And one of the things I love about different genres is the different ways that they tweak your nerves, with the different ways that they stab you in the heart or torture you consensually. It was a real delight to have like a real pro helping me navigate what the F a genre, what the F a thriller is. Like, how do you write a scary story that's also a thriller?
Yeah. And I think that there's so many elements of like the dark alleys and the like kind of atmospheric moods that it really does and should appeal to mystery readers, and especially Countdown City. Who wrote that?
I don't know, but I will.
Ben Winters. So like kind of elements of science fiction fantasy into a mystery, and I think yours is kind of fantasy science fiction horror with elements of mystery. So I think that anyone who loves those blending of genres, I think, will really get a lot out of this book. And I think the thing that I love most about horror books, the ones that I've read, because I do scare very easily, is symbolism and how it doesn't necessarily, I mean, there's so few examples of symbolism in modern writing where it's not something that kind of like you're thinking, what does that actually mean? And the whales, I think that the symbolism and the mystery of the whales, I have to ask, what do whales mean to you, and what do whales mean symbolically in the story?
Well, whales to me are amazing and awesome, and I'm just obsessed with them. I have a killer whale tattoo that I got for my novel Blackfish City, and a Moby Dick tattoo that I got for my novel The Art of Starving. So they're just awesome, badass, really smart, They whales engage in many of the behaviors that we think of as exclusively human, like killer whales kill for sport. They kill more than they need to, more than they can possibly eat. They can be vengeful. They can, remember that somebody did them wrong and try to harm them, which most animals don't do. Whales are wonderful. They're smart. They're a great sort of narrative about how we exploit the natural world, right? The fact that these magnificent, super smart, beautiful creatures fill the ocean and we just murdered them and murdered tons of them to sort of scoop oil out of their heads and make candles. And that's where, wealth and power came from. Whales actually have an extra deep resonance for someone growing up in Hudson, New York, because Hudson actually is a whaling town. I didn't make that up for this book. Even though it's 115 miles up the Hudson River, away from the ocean, it was a place where whaling vessels set out, and where the sort of like wealth and power that Hudson attained came from the slaughter of super smart mammals. Hudson has a lot of beautiful old houses that used to belong to whaling captains. Hudson at one point lost by one vote when it was going to be the capital of New York State. So there was a time where Hudson was like a big deal economically, and that was all due to whaling. And so growing up in an economically depressed post-industrial Hudson, that sort of former glory was everywhere. It's on our signs, on our street signs. Like all the street signs have little whales on them. It's on the city seal. There's monuments to whalers. So it's definitely something that was very present and that really sparked a young weirdo's imagination.
I had to look up when I first started reading the book. I was like, wait, do I not know where Hudson is? Like, how is this a whaling town? I did not know that part of the history. I don't know if I've ever actually been stopped in Hudson. I know I've been through, so I did not know that it was part of the town's history, and I assumed that that was part of the research and the history, and that you weren't just making up like, I'm going to throw whales in Hudson for the fun of it.
No, but I will say I did do a lot of research, and the Hudson Area Library I have to shout out because it's an amazing library and they have a great history section where they have a lot of great old documents. And so one of the things that growing up in Hudson, I had sort of like received a narrative of how whaling happened in Hudson. And it turned out that had nothing to do with the reality of what whaling actually looked like. When you look at the documents, the sort of the whaling, the sort of butchery in the streets that I describe in the opening chapter is not really how things happened. It's how it was described to me as a kid and sort of how the lore of Hudson treats it, but it's not necessarily how things really happen. So as I cop to in the acknowledgments, I know that I'm historically inaccurate. I went with, what's the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance quote? When the legend becomes reality, print the legend. The legend is more fun. So that's what I went with.
Yeah. I think that's probably a pretty good segue to the reading. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read the first chapter, which is a weird first chapter. I still don't know how I feel about it and whether it should be the first chapter, but it's in the book, in stores everywhere, so it's too late to change it. Chapter 1. Welcome to Hudson, a whale of a town. Bright raw wintertime, and Warren Street is a swath of white and red. Blood-soaked men drag strips of whale flesh through the snow. Black smoke billows from man-size iron tripods. Bones reach for the sky like irrational red fences, rib cages recently flensed. Hooks and knives and blades as long as swords slice and hack the air, a whole weird lexicon of specialized instruments. Mincing spade, monkey belt, fire pike, throat chain, fin toggle. The strips are sliced down into blocks. The blocks are fed to the bubbling pots. The whole city smells like blood and wood smoke and the thick, meaty mammalian stink of melting blubber, marine and vaguely reminiscent of alcohol. Blubber and skin and spermaceti are the engine of industry, the bloody gold that has powered Hudson's rise to power. boiled down and barreled and shipped off to light lanterns as far away as London. The baleen will become women's corsets, and the bones will be returned to the river, and the teeth will be scrimshawed and sent home to sweethearts, sold to collectors. But what will be done with the rest of these magnificent monsters? The livers as big as cows, the eyes the size of a human head, intestines so long they could be stretched off to mark the extent of any one of Hudson's uphill streets. Brains bigger than any humans, and wiser too, with the things they've seen at depths that would crush a man like a baby chick in a fist. Sunken empires, sea monsters believed to be mere myth, the skeletons of 1,000,000 drowned men and women. What will happen to the rest of the whale? Some will be fed to dogs and pigs. Some will be cooked and eaten by humans. Most will be buried. Long trenches along the waterfront at first, then creeping up the streets as space runs out. The hearts and brains of whales will feed Hudson's soil. Their blood ascends to the sky in oak tree branches, feeds its people in apples and corn, seeps into the stone and cement of the foundations of its homes. The sky darkens. The day's work is done. Men drink cheap cider. Tomorrow, maybe, more whale carcasses will come. The harbor stretches around into North Bay. You can count a couple dozen tall ship masts. In 20 years, the railroad will arrive, heading north from New York City, bound for Albany, for Canada, its path perfectly plotted to cut off Hudson's North Bay, cripple the city's shipping trade, start its slow decline into irrelevance. 40 years after that, Hudson will have become the East Coast's largest center for prostitution. The Diamond Street whorehouse is so notorious that they'll have to change the name of the street to Columbia after the governor personally sends a swarm of state troopers to bust up the brothels that local authorities have coddled and patronized and exploited for information for decades. Bootleggers will base their operations out of Hudson. So will crystal meth manufacturers many years later. Movies will shoot here, ones that want somewhere that still looks like the Great Depression. Ones where Jack Nicholson is an alcoholic or Harry Belafonte is a broken down gambler. Hudson has been many cities, but it has always been this one, the one with soil steeped in blood, with a harbor full of bones.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So I think I'm going to ask if anyone from Hudson has been really excited about your portrayal of Hudson.
Well, so shout out to another awesome independent bookstore, the Spotty Dog in Hudson on Warren Street, and Kelly Drahushik, the owner and an amazing bookseller and all-around marvelous human, was the first person who's actually from Hudson who read the book, and I was really scared. She seemed to like it. I am sort of blessed or cursed with the ability to write some stuff without really thinking of the consequences until it's too late. And then it's out in the world, or it's about to be. So I don't know how people will feel. I'm watching my English teachers and other people from back home comment on it on Facebook, and I'm super excited they're going to read it and super scared. Fun fact, the two movies that the thing at the end of that chapter, those are real movies. Jack Nicholson played a broken down alcoholic in Ironweed, which shot in Hudson in the 80s in the alley behind my father's store. And Harry Belafonte played a broken down gambler in Odds Against Tomorrow, which shot in Hudson in the 50s. So yes, it does look like the Great Depression. That is part of its cinematic and architectural appeal.
Well, I think the tourism industry of Hudson should thank you, because it does make me really want to go to Hudson. Like, it makes me want to like spend a really solid chunk of time there exploring.
Well, when you do, I'll give you restaurant recommendations. Most of the ones in the book are not real. The Pizza Pit actually does not exist anymore, but they did make the best pizza. And any other businesses that I talk shit about that are the sort of new arrivals that are gentrifying my neighborhood, they're not real. I'm not naming any names.
Now, the butcher shop, though, is based on your father's butcher shop, correct?
Yes. There behind me, there's a photograph. Actually, let me show that. This is actually my grandfather who's in the apron in the doorway of the butcher shop. His name was Sam, as is mine. The store was not named after me. It was named after my grandfather. And so, yes, he had a butcher shop that my father inherited in 1973 that closed in the 90s when Walmart came to town. And put us and a lot of small businesses out of business. So even though Ronan and I are not the same person, he's a hot mess, and I like to think I'm just sort of a lukewarm to cold mess. There is a lot of biographical overlap, and his father had a butcher shop at 310 Warren Street, as did mine.
I didn't know it got so specific as to the street address being the same.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it is now it was my father sold that building to settle a tax debt for $50,000 in the 90s, and it recently sold for $1.6 million to become the gym of the Maker Hotel. So that's how things have changed in Hudson in the last couple decades.
Yeah, is the mayor based on anyone kind of?
Of course not. None of the people who I say terrible things about are real. No, there's all of the sort of like the evil billionaire, the compromised mayor, the corrupt real estate agents none of them are based on real people. It's sort of a very abstract idea of sort of some of the what gentrification looks like and who are some of the key players who make gentrification happen, not in the sense of who are the specific people, but what are the sort of crucial roles. Like if a neighborhood is going to change, if a community is going to change, you need politicians, you need corporate interests, you need developers. It's sort of like the business of neighborhood transformation requires actual humans. So these are cartoon humans. I mean, hopefully they're not cartoons. Hopefully they feel like real people, but they're not real.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine like various mayors around the country that I know that, not personally. No, I only know maybe one mayor, kind of, sort of. But like all these stories that you hear about kind of corrupt mayors and some of the ones that have gone to prison, where I'm like, maybe, like, and especially the outgoing mayor as well as the incoming mayor, I can definitely see a lot of influence from some of those famous mayors that have been terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there's any reality to that character, it's not a small town mayor, but it's just something that distilled from the years that I spent as a community organizer in New York City, working on issues of gentrification and displacement. Time after time, I would sit down with elected officials and sort of ask them to implement really simple, common sense policies to stop displacement and gentrification, and understanding the extent to which politicians, especially local politicians, depend on real estate interests and developers for the money that they use to run for office, and the extent to which they're in the pocket of the interests that are gentrifying. So the challenge of moving an elected official to do the right thing when their political ambitions are predicated upon making wealth happy.
So keeping in the character, I love the trio of Ronan, Dom, and Atala. And I just want to know how you created that relationship between the three that feels like all three are very much propelling the story. And I wanted to know like how you built their relationships, where you thought their relationships were strong, and where you wanted to take these characters from the beginning.
I think my sort of prime directive with all the characters in this book, but especially those three, was to situate the complexity of gentrification in real people and to situate the different sides and the ways that some people benefit from and some people are harmed by when rents are rising and people are being displaced, and the sort of compromises people make to keep the peace, and the sort of like, do you fight back? Do you recognize that fighting back is futile? So these different perspectives, these different backgrounds, these different stories, and as I was sort of thinking about this core trio of people who have a lot in common, but are also really different and want really different things. It was really fun, and that's how I knew that I was onto something. They were really fun to write. They really came to life in a way that felt like I didn't necessarily know where things were going to go. Like I knew who they were, but I didn't know what they would do in different situations, and that makes for fun for the writer and hopefully also for the reader to sort of like, set them up on these courses and see what happens, and hopefully there will be some narrative surprises. And there were. I really I wanted to make it clear that these are complex issues and that there's no bad people on any side of it. There's people who do bad things, but they're not necessarily bad people. And so, having people who engage in violence or who break the law or who break different laws, but making it clear that they're all people, was again, that's sort of one of my main goals as a writer, is to make the incomprehensible behavior of human beings comprehensible to me and maybe to others.
I love the twist on, can we talk about the queer angle for a little
Sure.
bit? Because I feel like that has to be a part of this conversation. I love their relationship and how the history of them. So Atala and Dom were friends with Ronan in high school, and Dom had a relationship of some sort with Ronan in high school, but Dom has never really been out, and he's married to Atala, but in the very beginning, that he is having various relationships with other. I'm assuming are the other relationships that he's involved in, are they with women? Is Ronan the only male relationship, the only queer relationship he's had?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you know that that was going to be such an integral part to Dom's character when you started writing his character?
I wanted it to be this really formative influence on and the sort of the best friend of Ronan, who probably doesn't identify as gay, and beyond the intimacy that he had with Ronan in high school, hasn't really explored that any further, but who is someone who is cares really deeply about Ronan, and as when Ronan returns, they sort of rekindle something, and it's sort of like, the whole book is about things that are spiraling out of control and things that start off being pretty straightforward and then get real messy. So Dom and Ronan's relationship, gets real messy. The mischief that they're engaged in, the attempts that they have to sort of organize a resistance to the wealthy people who want to tear down a bunch of buildings and transform the city. That spirals out of control and gets really messy and violent and horrific. So, that's sort of the main thing, is taking people who are, who make sense, who are decent people, and they are in a situation that is going to start to get real crazy.
And as a queer reader, which I know, I'm assuming you're a queer reader as well. Yeah. I know you're a writer. I don't know. But
I read and write as a queer person.
Wow. I only do one of those two things. But I read a lot of, and I don't mind so much like the kind of never-ending books coming out about coming out. I don't mind that as much as I think a lot of, or certain queer influencers do. And that seems to be historically what the genre of queer literature has been. It's so many coming out stories that it's just one tiny twist on that. And I think that a lot of queer readers are going to appreciate so much the difference of this book, where it is so significant and so central to the characters and to the storyline, but it's definitely not really a coming out story. It's not, I mean, even though Dom is kind of figuring out like what Ronan means to him, but Ronan, like, he is very out, very proud, has been for years, so that's not a part of his story at all. And I want to know how you feel about the queer genre as a whole and what you find strength in and where you think it's going.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I love quick coming out stories. I've read many of them. I've written some of them. They're important. I also write young adult, and often those stories, when you're writing for young people, you're often writing for people who might not have had exposure to 1,000 queer stories the way I have. The way I hadn't when I was 14, but the way I have now that I'm 41. So I think that's important. There's a place for that, but I want more than that, and so I write more than that. And I think that again, messiness is kind of the theme of The Blade Between. That I want the messy stories. I want the stories about people who are struggling with addiction and the people who are engaged in, who are engaged in complex, messy, romantic, and intimate relationships. I think that I understand the sort of like DNA of queer lit that involves a certain amount of like wanting to prove to straight readers that we're just like them and deserving of rights and deserving of respect, and that there's a lot of stories like that, and a lot of stories that sort of play out the sort of internalized narratives of what queer people have to do to be accepted by straight readers. But as much as I love and respect straight readers, that's not who I'm primarily writing for. And I want people to see themselves in all of their messy complexity, and that includes people who behave badly, who are not ready for prime time. A lot of my favorite queer stories, even if you look back historically, are not that. They're not coming out stories. They're stories about people behaving badly. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin is a miserable story, but a really powerful one about the ways in which queer people internalize homophobia and how we let it limit our happiness. And one of my big discovery of 2020, when you talk about classic queer lit, is Poppy Z. Bright's Drawing Blood, which is a horror story, very scary, very violent, and a very messy but beautiful gay romance at the center of it, with a lot of really graphic intimacy and violence. And so, yeah, those are the stories that I want just as much as like the happy, wonderful coming out story that is going to give, some beautiful queer baby somewhere, some shred of hope.
Yeah, I love that. Because I mean, before I was accepting of myself, I needed those stories, and yeah, like I'm nearing 40, and I still find so many, like, I Red, White, and Royal Blue. Like, I don't know if you read that. It's it's romance. It's almost pure romance, but it is so just delicious and so readable. And I think that the romance genre needs a story like that, whether or not like so. I want to ask you, first off, if anyone in the audience watching has any questions, you can type those up. We will be switching to audience Q&A at any point in time. But I want to ask you about things that were off limits for you as an author. So did you have any rules going into this? Because the world is so complex and there's so many things going on. So I want to know if you just said like, okay, there are going to be 0 rats in this story, or I don't know, something like that. And also similarly, did you have any rules for your characters? Like Dom can do this, but Ronan can't do that. Or like the mayor can't like super can't do that in the story. And did you break any of those rules for yourself or the characters while writing it?
Well, that's an interesting storytelling trick that I will reveal. I mean, I was a student of the Clarion Writers Workshop, which totally changed my life. And one of my teachers was Delia Sherman, who's a wonderful writer. And one of the things she said that really changed how I think about story was that one important engine of story is to think about the one thing that a character will never do and then contrive to make them do it, like to create the circumstances in which they would either betray something they hold dear or be forced to do something they really don't want to do. That makes for really powerful stories. So in the sense of like, do these characters, as they are humans with a moral compass, they might have rules for themselves that they will end up breaking, and most of them do. With me as an author, as a moral compass, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I won't do. I don't want violence against women. I don't want gratuitous violence in general. I don't want to engage in hate speech. There's some ugliness in the book that ugliness is real, and ugliness can be talked about in ways that don't trigger people and inflict that on people. And so when I'm a reader, I am often, if there's hate speech or sexual violence or a lot of other things like that, those are the things that make me want to put a book down or stop watching a movie. And so those are things that I try not to do as an author. If I'm going to talk about real horror, I want to do it in a way that's going to like provoke thought and reflection and not freak people out or trigger people or, go for a gratuitous, visceral response, even if it's an unpleasant one.
You mentioned triggers, and I think that the entire genre of horror kind of comes with its own like bag of probably need to be careful going into this if you have like big triggers in your own life. But I'm wondering, like, where, like, do you feel there should be in reviews some trigger warnings about your book? Because I know there is suicide in there that is pretty sensitive, and it's the way that you write it, it's very it's dealt with sensitively. Like, it's not gratuitous, it's very realistic. And I think that with the especially the trans character, where that is a part of so many tragic trans stories. So I want to know what that story meant to you, and if there was significance behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that trigger warnings are a really important topic, and it's really tough because everyone's triggers are different, and some people will not be triggered by something that is super horrific and triggering to someone else. So I'm not opposed to people putting trigger warnings on reviews, and that if people are, I try to not be gratuitous and exploitative, and I try to be respectful, and but that doesn't mean that someone else won't be triggered by it, and some people are triggered by, like my first novel, The Art of Starving, was about rooted in my own experience as a survivor of an eating disorder, and lots of people can't read about that, even if it's handled respectfully. So I get it, I respect it. With that, as with any of the things in this book, I get that, if there are things in fiction that are for me triggering and that I'll stop reading if I encounter them, and I don't personally, sometimes it's nice to know before you read something this horrible thing is going to happen. So I'm not opposed to it. But yeah, to the extent that I'm dealing with real issues like suicide, like mental illness, like infidelity, this is very much something that I tried to be respectful of and don't want to freak anybody out, but I get that people are triggered by different things. So, yeah, if folks need that, they that's real.
Yeah. I think that you do very much, like, with all of those issues, they are real issues that affect everyone's lives. And I think that's part of what makes so much of the story universal. So I definitely appreciated the incorporation of them and how well you like how well they were a part of the story, but not, yeah, gratuitous. They weren't sensationalized. So
thank you.
So we don't have any questions from the audience yet. Or
come on, people,
they?
ask some questions.
I know. Oh, here we go. Okay, as I said. All right. So, this is from someone named Dominic. All right. So Dominic says, as much as I adore the three characters at the center of the novel, A Blade Between is a bit of an ensemble. One of the things that remind me of Stephen King's work. One of your influences. That's a great comment. Sam was one of the more minor characters. Who was one of the more minor characters you loved to write, and why?
Hi, Dominic. Thank you for that question. This is terrible. I don't remember her name. Zelda. Zelda, the sort of hot mess recovering addict, was super fun. And one of the things that I love about Stephen King is the way these sort of like minor characters sort of become part of a mosaic of for example, a town. And obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but Stephen King's novel Needful Things is a really big influence on this book, and a lot of the sort of like mechanics of a town that just loses its mind and everybody suddenly turns on everybody is at play here. And yeah, the way that you could have really small minor characters, like the high school teacher who's having a secret affair with the gym coach, and that they have this secret relationship that makes them vulnerable. And so if a malevolent supernatural force wants to create violence, it could exploit that. So yeah, Zelda was a fun minor character who I needed to serve a very small purpose, but then she was too much fun, and I kept having to trot her out to do more shenanigans.
I agree. Zelda's a really great character. So, all right. Which of the major characters do you find yourself identifying more with one of the major characters? And was it easier to write that character because of the proximity to you, or did that make it harder?
There's definitely a lot of me in all of these characters, or there's a lot of these characters in me. There's aspects of Atala's rage and her commitment to fixing social problems that is familiar to me. There are pieces of Dom's peacekeeper nature, his desire to broker calm and get people to chill the F out, that is really me. And then there's a lot of Ronan's hot mess, bad decision making that I try not to be, but he's got some of my whatever stupidity. I don't know. So yeah, that tends to make it easy to write them. Is that if they're real to me, if they're human, if they're alive, even if it means that I have to put some of myself out there, that usually makes it easier. Because then no one knows what's really me. There's 10 character traits. Maybe one of them is me, but nobody knows which one that's really me. So that's why I don't write nonfiction very much. Is because fiction it allows you to hide behind the masks of like, this is just a character, or maybe I don't really feel this way.
Yeah, and I mean, all fiction comes from somewhere, whether it be like a person or an influence. It's all influenced by something. So if some of that is influenced by yourself, then that's a special little trick that only you can have, or that only you know about. Silver's asking who is your favorite character, but I think that maybe answered a little bit in that question. But hi, Silver, good to see you again. Chauncey,
Wansi.
Okay,
that would be my husband. Hi, Wansi.
Oh, yay! So sorry. Do you ever find yourself writing a character that you deeply dislike? How do you approach creating someone who may be personally repellent?
Oh, they're the most fun. I love that. There's this character of Trini in this book who is the real estate profiteer, and sort of her gleeful dicing and cutting up and selling of her town is, reprehensible to me, but a great delight to write. So it has happened, not in this book, but in other projects where I've set out to write someone who's really terrible, and they are so terrible that I ended up having to be like, oh no, I can't write this story. Or I wrote this story, but I can never send this anywhere. So it does happen that, in my joy, in the delight that I take in trying to make incomprehensible behavior comprehensible, I might make it too comprehensible, and some behavior should be incomprehensible. So sometimes I will go too far, but most of my villains are just like really fun. I really enjoy being able to hide behind another mask of somebody who can just do, there's buildings that I just want to burn down, and I'll never do that, but I can have fictional characters who will burn those buildings down for me.
I love to hate the high school bully, whatever his name was, because Stub, that's right. Yeah, I just like despise him so much and see so many of my own high school bullies in him. And I want that to be the path that they've taken with I'm like, oh, did they stay evil? I really hope so. I really hope they stayed evil.
Well, I'm sorry to accidentally trigger high school bully flashbacks. Lord knows we've all got them, but yes, I'm glad that felt true, even if true is terrible.
Yeah. I mean, I just want like them to continue being just like a terrible person, and bad things happen to them because they're just still a terrible person. But I mean, some of it, like, okay, yeah, maybe hopefully they realized when they got out of the small town that we all grew up in that, oh, wait, like being homophobic really isn't cool.
Yeah.
I want to talk more about Hudson, but I don't know where I want to go with it, because I'm so intrigued by Hudson and the town and the history, and I love, so where, like, what kind of, do you have any hidden Easter eggs that only people from Hudson might really appreciate that someone like me who has never spent time in Hudson would miss?
I mean, like I said, I did a lot of research into the history, and I have a lot of my own sort of formative year experiences there. So, people who grew up in Hudson in the 80s and 90s remember the Pizza Pit and how awesome it was. And then there's the Iron Horse Tavern, which is long closed, but that's mentioned. This is a big thing for a dinosaur-obsessed person like me. The dinosaurs that were at the World's Fair in 1963 or 64 were actually constructed just outside of Hudson. These gigantic, like life-size dinosaur statues, and before they were put on a barge and shipped down to New York City, they were displayed in the main park of Hudson. So there's lots of fun, real things that I think a local would get. There's people who make really brief appearances who are past, who are not with us anymore, and that somebody might remember them.
Nice. We don't really have a kind of quiet audience this evening, but let's talk about your, like, what you're doing next, because I know that the last book was a little bit more science fiction-y. This one is a little bit more horror-y. Is that a word? No, I don't think it should be. So where do you want to go, and where are your stories going to take you?
I have no idea, but I'm trying to think of what are the genres I haven't done yet that I want to do. I do think that my next novel is going to be science fiction. There is a sort of like story I really want to tell around imagining futures that are not the climate apocalypse, and like what are the technological and human changes we would need to make that would change things for the better, so that, trying to imagine that there's hope and reason to not despair, that we're going to completely destroy this planet. That's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. But also, like, I am working on a graphic novel pitch about a super twisted, messy obsession relationship between two boys who become addicted to a futuristic drug. And so, yeah, lots of things that I haven't tried that I really want to try. I love graphic novels, and I'm excited to try one. Tilly Walden's "Are You Listening" is the latest, like, blew my mind graphic novel that I read that I have to recommend to everybody.
I love cli-fi and think that there should be more written in that genre because it's not an easy genre to find a lot of books for.
No, and it's easy to imagine the horrible futures. I think it's more difficult, but more important to imagine the ones where, people will still be garbage, will still be awful people who do awful things, but we also might be capable of, like, creating technology that will save the planet, or harnessing fungus that can digest bacteria, which they really are, and using that to clean up the plastic in the ocean. Whatever. There's science fiction lets us imagine the crazy stuff that isn't real but should be real, and that can become the inspiration for people to feel like there's reason to hope and fight to fix the planet.
So Dominic is asking another question. Were you tempted to include more dinosaurs in this book, since whales play like such a large part, another large animal?
Always. I'm always tempted to put more dinosaurs in. And I did, there's a brief mention of the 1960s dinosaur statues in the park, but there was a much longer section that I cut for time. Yeah, this didn't feel like the dinosaur book. There will be more dinosaurs. There is a mammoth. This was the mammoth is the tattoo that I got for the Blade Between, because the villain, in a vulgar display of power, has a mammoth skeleton in his home. But yeah, there's always at least one totem, sort of sacred, special animal in my work.
Silver asks, what happens first, the way your characters look or their voice?
The voice, usually. It's it's a lot of things. I shouldn't. There's no hard and fast rule. Usually, like, stories come from a million different places, and characters come from a million different places. Usually, when I really, like, I might have some vague idea of who a character is, like, oh, this is a soldier in Soviet Russia in the 1920s, or this is a woman in a future that worships orcas. So I might know a little bit about them, but usually when I know what the first sentence is, when I start to really hear their voice, that's when the story really comes alive. So I guess voice is the thing that usually makes them cease to be a bunch of descriptions and become a person.
Tony says, I love Blackfish City, but I haven't read The Blade Between yet, which is available from Left Bank Books. Link in the comments.
Books, everybody.
So it says, it's hard to ask a question, but hi, Sam. And then we have two questions actually about the connections between The Art of Starving and A Blade Between. So Sarah's asking, I can't quite remember if The Art of Starving was also set in Hudson or just a Hudson-esque town. If the former, are there any recurring characters? Will you Derry, Maine, your Hudson? Oh, another Stephen King reference. I get that one. Good
job. Hi, Tony, and hi, Sarah. That's a great question. There is not so much a person character, but there is, spoiler alert for The Art of Starving. It's not really a spoiler. You don't need to know how or when this happens, but there is a great hog rampage in that book, where an army of pigs is released from a slaughterhouse and wrecks shop. The characters in The Blade Between, there's a scene where Dom and Ronan are in a forest hooking up, and Dom tells the story of the Great Hog Rampage that happened a few years back. So yes, The Art of Starving was definitely set in the real Hudson, or the same fictional Hudson as The Blade Between. And yeah, it's weird because I kind of like couldn't wait to get the hell out of Hudson and moved away as soon as I turned 18. But yet 3 of my 4 novels have been set there. So yeah, it might be my dairy. It might be the kind of place I keep going back to. Or maybe this exercised that ghost. I mean, Stephen King eventually, I don't think he blew up Derry, but did enough to it that he was done writing about it. So maybe I'm done with it. But I've said before, like all my stuff takes place in a shared universe. So there's lots of references between books and between stories. And so, yes, this is the same Hudson. And so, yeah, there's lots of little Easter eggs and jokes that probably 0 people besides me will ever spot, but I spot them and make me chuckle.
I wonder if Dominic was actually answering the question, because Dominic says there was a mention of the pig escape from The Art of Starving in A Blade Between. Yeah, and 2,000 pigs escaped, and they only killed 1,000 of them.
Yeah, I think that's the math.
Wow.
So it's 1,000 feral pigs roaming Hudson, waiting to burst into narrative significance again.
And that's true. Like that actually happened.
No, that's not true. Sorry. I'm sorry. No, that happened in my book. There is no slaughterhouse in Hudson. It was a metaphor for economic exploitation. So it's real in the shared universe of my stories. Those 1,000 pigs will be seen again, I'm sure. But yeah, sorry for the confusion. Among Hudson's many charms that would welcome the traveler, the murder pigs is not one of them, alas.
So when I do visit Hudson, I don't have to worry about the murder pigs.
No, there are bears. There's bears that periodically pop up on the main street, but they rarely kill anybody.
Rarely being the very important.
I mean, I don't think it's ever happened, but you don't want to be the first, Shane.
Yeah. No, I never want to be the first of anything. Like that's not what my plan in life is. All right. Well, you've been so pleasant to talk to. This has been so much fun.
So have you. Thank you. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in. And order books, everybody. How do I point at the thing for them to buy books?
I will bring up the banner again. Buy at left-bank.com, and I will share the link again for everyone that has watched. This is a great gift idea, so it is perfect for so many people on your shopping list, because it should appeal to so many people. And if they love genre, because I love genre, like almost any genre. I do love my literary fiction as well, which this definitely fits in there too.
It's a genre.
It is a genre, yeah.
They think they're better than us, but they're us.
They are us, yeah. So definitely buy the book, support Left Bank Books. We thank you so much for tuning in this evening. If you liked the event, you can share it, and more people can experience this book and this wonderful story and wonderful fun conversation that we had about a horror novel. So I thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shane. Have a great night.
Thank you.